What's going on, guys? Today, as part of my Behind the Song series, I'm going to talk about the 10 tracks from my debut album, Distance, which featured a ton of collaborators. I'm going to tell you a little bit of the story behind the recording of the songs, behind the writing of the songs. So if you have any other questions, just leave them in the comments and I'll answer them. And if you want to hear the album, you can listen to it on all streaming and download platforms right now. The first song I'm going to break down for you in my Behind the Song mini-series is Spend the Night, which was my first single and also one of the first songs that I ever wrote. I remember I wrote it on a train. I wrote 2 songs that day and the other one went in the bin. This one I took to Steve Hogan, who I actually can't remember how I met or found out about Steve, but he's a drummer and a producer here in Dublin and Ireland. And he kind of assembled the crew that would work with me on this song. The very first person I met was Brian Grace, who was a well-known guitarist here, and I co-wrote the song with him. We assembled the melodies on a guitar, and that was the hard part, really, going in and singing a song that, you know, I had no way of kind of saying this is what I want it to sound like. I gave a couple of references. At the time I really liked Dido and similar songwriters, very simplistic kind of vocals and delivery. And then from there we moved to Cian Boylan's studio, which I remember just had organs and pianos and keyboards all around this open plan room. And he played the Hammond that you hear in the intro and actually all the way through the song, and any of the weird synthy bits you hear and the keyboards, which would become something I would use more and more on later songs. Cian played all of those, and then I also recorded my vocals in Cian's studio, and that was a great experience. And then where did we go from there? We went to Fionn de Barra's studio. He was working out of Moya Brennan from Clonard's house, which was a totally different experience again. So this was like, there were a lot of cooks and a lot of kitchens on this song, and so we mixed there and we mastered. Fionn de Barra mastered the track, and that was the final gloss. Lyrically, I got to thinking about lyrically what this song is about, and I don't have a really clear memory of the origins of what it's about, but I think it's about self-doubt and trying to raise yourself up, and you know, particularly the line, do you believe that you can be the one you want to be? So it was at the beginning of my career. I would have been only probably 19 years old, and I was making a lot of decisions about what I wanted to do. So it's very much a first single, kind of like the story there is literally where I was in my life. Production wise, I suppose it's quite soulful and quite stereotypical of the singer-songwriter sound at the time. That's really all there is to say. Track 2 is Destination Anywhere. This was the first track that I worked on with Mourad Bouchiba, a Moroccan producer who was based in Amsterdam. I had the opportunity to work with him. It was a couple of months after I had finished 5 of the tracks off this Distance album in Dublin with Steve Hogan, and I had kind of come to a standstill and I had blown my budget actually on the producers here, and then this opportunity came up. I went over on a weekend on a Friday, and we had dinner that night and we had lots of drinks, and then he gave me this backing track, and basically I had to go back to my hotel room and write a song to this backing track. But what I remembered was I had my laptop with me, which I had all these lyrics on there, and I didn't have anything prepared, obviously, because I'd never heard the track before. But I somehow managed to take this particular lyric, Destination Anywhere, which is exactly as you hear it on the song lyrically. Nothing's been changed. Emma O'Donnell, a friend of mine from school, wrote the chorus of this song and she sent it to me, and I tried to interpret, get into her headspace and write verses to match, and it's the first and only time that I've done this up to now, and it was a miracle. It just, everything slotted together so well. I just started singing the song over the backing track. I found a melody quite easily because I suppose it's quite repetitive, it's hypnotic, it doesn't change that much melodically, but I think it really works. It was such a change for me It's more urban than anything I've ever done before. You know, I think you can really hear the difference in the tracks that were recorded in Dublin and the tracks that were recorded in Amsterdam. There is a different flavour there, and a different palette of influences coming from, you know, the music that the producer gave me, and then I think I felt quite freed by being away as well. And when I look back, actually, at the time I wasn't all that sure if the tracks that were recorded in Amsterdam and the ones that were recorded in Dublin sit well together, but in retrospect I think it showed off different sides to me, and that was a good thing for a debut album. And actually I think that this is probably my favourite track now from that record. So thank you, Emma, for the chorus. It was wonderful to work with you, and I hope we'll do it again. Wonderful Accident is track 3, and it's also the third song that I worked on with Steve Hogan. And it was a little bit different because we didn't have this song built from the ground up. Steve already had this backing track, and he gave it to me with a bunch of other backing tracks when I was looking for songs to compile the album. So I took them home. I started to look through my lyrics and see what could match up with them. And so I had this idea that I wanted to make a song that had kind of some hallmarks of the 90s. Like, I used to really love Savage Garden and Alanis Morissette, where they would have just a ton of lyrics, so much that you would almost like trip up over delivering them. And that proved more difficult in reality than it did in my head. So we had a little bit of trouble with the vocal, and I didn't want to back down and change my lyric or my idea. But we eventually got there, and then we had further difficulties when Steve's system crashed and we lost all of our work from the vocal day. And so I had to go back into the studio again, I think a couple of weeks later, and record the vocal again. Further challenges on top of the fact that I had a cold, and so I was never really I was never really convinced that the vocal take that I did that day was good enough. But for better or for worse, we pressed ahead, and that's the vocal take you hear on the record. I definitely wouldn't be able to sing it that way now in that pitch. I think it would be cool to hear what an unplugged version of this might sound like, maybe with a few little tweaks, but that's something for another day. The chorus is inspired by the Madonna song Jump, particularly the line, there's only so much you can learn in one place, the more that you wait, the more time that you waste. I adapted that line and built on it. What I liked about it was that it kind of says, don't expect me to stay the same, because the same is what scares me more than change. And that has been true for as long as I can remember for me. And so this song still resonates with me today. Track 4 is How Many Times Can We Say Goodbye? This was the lead single from the album that came out on the same day in April 2008, can you believe? This was recorded in the same sessions as Wonderful Accident, but it was a lot more straightforward to record, being a nice down-tempo ballad, and it was probably my first brush with country as well. It has that hallmark storytelling style. I wrote it from the point of view of two people in a relationship, so it changes from verse to verse and goes back and forth. I actually got the idea from two different sources. There was a painting in my living room, and it was titled How Many Times Can We Say Goodbye? So that's where I got the title, and it had been there for years. And then one night the show Sex and the City was on, and Carrie Bradshaw's the character Carrie Bradshaw was doing her inner voice typey thing, and she said, when is it too late for one more try? And I thought that's a great line. Like, how do you know when it's not all right? When is it too late for one more try? Where do you draw the line? And that's where the whole lyric was born. I wrote it that night. Production wise for me, it was kind of, I started to become quite inspired by John Mayer, and so that was I kept saying during production I wanted to sound a little bit like John Mayer vibes, and I think, we got as close as you can get. But as far as the songwriting behind this, I think it was really about being, it was one of those times where you have to be open to the ideas that are already around you and just absorb them, and that's what you always hope for as a songwriter. Track 5 is Killing Kind, which is the first cover you hear on the album. It was the first of 2 covers actually, and this one was originally recorded and also written by the US country artist Shelby Lynne, who I really recommend you check out if you haven't heard her stuff. I had actually recorded a demo of this track about 2 years previous to the recording of the album on my very first demo CD, and when I went to Amsterdam to record almost half of the album, I had mentioned the track in passing to Mourad, who was the producer that I was working with over there, and he was really taken with the track. He, I think, saw it as kind of being a centerpiece almost of the album that was, it had certain pop elements and then it had some more kind of organic kind of country rock elements, more like what I had recorded in Dublin. So I think he saw it as kind of tying everything together. I wasn't so convinced because when I was recording, or when I was kind of running through the track, I felt like the chorus was just at too high a register for me, and I just wasn't finding it comfortable, or you know, I really wanted to do justice to the track if we were going to do it, because I'm a big Shelby Lynne fan, and I don't believe in doing a cover if you can't bring either something new to it, or at least you know, do it some justice. So that's where the vocalist that you'll hear on the chorus comes in, that's Aziza Amazoudi, who was brought in by Mourad. She was somebody who he had recorded with before, and she came in and she tried out singing the chorus, and she did a great job. She just changed the whole vibe. She was almost operatic in her tone, and yeah, it was fantastic. It totally changed the whole song, and then we added kind of a section towards the end of the song that changed it up from the original as well. I still wasn't convinced though about the track being on the album, because when you hear the track, it won't be noticeable to everyone, but it wasn't a custom made instrumental for me. It was one of those sort of almost karaoke type backing tracks, and when I compared it to everything else that we had recorded and everything that I had recorded in Dublin, which was a live band, I felt like it was cheap and it just didn't sound up to the standard of the rest of the album. But on this occasion I didn't win, and not only did it end up on the album, but it was actually released as a promo single at the end of the album cycle as well, on account of the fact that so many people actually said that they really liked the track, and some people even said it was their favourite on the album. So I was absolutely baffled, but I suppose sometimes a great song just shines through no matter what the production or the instrumentation is like. So yeah, so I've left it on there on this repack that you hear, and I hope you enjoy it. Track 6 is Left You Behind, which was built in a similar sort of way to Destination Anywhere, in the sense that it was one of those instrumentals that Mourad had lying around, and he was playing them for me one day when I was in the studio in Amsterdam, and I was sort of saying yes, no to each track, and I'd kind of resigned myself to the fact that there was going to be a few urban tracks on the album, even though that wasn't my original plan, and this kind of was the exact flavour of urban I really liked, and there was that sort of late 90s George Michael vibe to it as well, which I loved. I think I really let go vocally with this song. I allowed myself to go a little bit more edgy, a little bit more pop than I had done with some of the live band tracks that I recorded in Dublin. I remember asking Mourad, where's the rest of it, because it's only 2 minutes 28 seconds. I said that's more of an interlude than a song, but definitely I wanted to include it in the album regardless of how long it was. It ended up being the perfect kind of palate cleanser before the sort of more urban pop midsection of the album, particularly after Killing Kind, which was a real shift. Lyrically, I suppose it's about moving on from a relationship, and knowing that people are going to be sort of talking behind your back saying it was his fault, but it's also kind of liberating, going, look, I'm done, I'm moving on, and I'm not going to discuss it anymore. I particularly like the line, but I'm on the road to recovery, and there's always self-discovery, because like always, I love a rhyme. Track 7 is titled I'll Be the King, and this was the very last song that I recorded for the Distance album. The last song that we did during the sessions with Mourad Bouchiba in Amsterdam. And it was written completely differently actually than anything else on the record. It was the only song that was written in the studio, the only song that I didn't have any lyrics written for prior to recording. I just did it in complete real time, off the cuff, in the vocal booth. I had Mourad Bouchiba just play me the track on a loop. He had played me the track earlier that day, and then we recorded some other track, and then later that night I was like, we kind of thought we had the album finished actually, and I was like, play me that track again, I'd like to have just a little bit of fun with it, I think I have this idea. And I kind of thought it had the essence of kind of some of the early noughties All Saints kind of stuff, that slight reggae kind of hook. And so I just went in and I was riffing some lyrics, and it is, I think you can hear how much fun we actually had with it. We weren't taking it too seriously at all because we didn't think it was going to be on the album. But then for such a fun song, the lyrics are quite angry and mean-spirited, but I think they come from a place of frustration more so than anything else. It was originally titled Somewhere That We're Something Here We're Not, which I thought would look way too long in the booklet beside the other titles, so I changed it. But you know, I think if you look at absolutely everything that I've put out since then, this is definitely the most bizarre and off-brand thing that I've put my name to. And today I think it would definitely be relegated to B-side status, but I can't rewrite history, so it's there forever on the first album. Track 8 is Damage to the Heart, which was one of the very early tracks that I wrote for this album, but actually it never fit in with the mood of any of the instrumentals that Steve brought to the table during the Dublin sessions for the album. And I think in retrospect it's actually a good thing, because this kind of more slow jam R&B light vibe works a lot better in my opinion. I think a lot of people at the time thought that I was going for sort of a Justin Timberlake kind of sound, but it wasn't at all. I actually was very drawn to the chill out aspects of the backing track from the moment I heard it. You know, I like all the synths and the little vocal samples, and it's just kind of it's kind of got that sort of Cafe Del Mar feel to it. So I was a lot more conscious of my vocal approach during the Amsterdam sessions, and that was probably as a result of, you know, getting up, going to the studio every day, rather than it being spread over a period of months and having weeks in between sessions. So I just got a lot more into it, and also the tracks being a little bit more on the pop side of things, I think I was a bit more playful. I went kind of crazy on the ad-libs on this one, and also I had this request that some of the callbacks in the chorus sounded like they were recorded over a phone, which is kind of a weird request, but I'm happy with how it turned out. And particularly the last sequence of the song, the To the Heart echo, I really like, and I think it adds to that sense of drama. You know, the lyric is quite over the top and dramatic. It's, you know, Damage to the Heart is obviously the name of the song, and it kind of, there's a lot of metaphors in there, I suppose. But it's about I suppose getting less than you expected from a relationship. And one thing I did do with this song in the choruses is each chorus adapts a little bit, and the breakdown chorus, some of the lines change and the delivery changes. I'm not a big fan of songs where the chorus sounds like it's kind of been copied and pasted. I think it just packs a much stronger emotional punch if each one has a little bit of variation. So random fact to finish up on this song, this is one of only 3 tracks of mine that I've never performed live, so that might be something to look to do in the future. Track 9 is Tonight, and this was the last Steve Hogan produced song on the album. They sort of bookend the record in a sense. This was co-written with Steve and also with Cian Boylan, who featured on Spend the Night, playing the various organs and keyboards as he does here as well. This was due to be the second single originally, before everything fell apart with my deal, with my Irish deal. and then of course nothing was released in 2007 at all. Instead I decided to go back and record the full album before releasing anything else in 2008. So it's quite a straightforward, it's probably my most stereotypical love song. I actually kind of had cynical reasons for including it or for writing it, because I felt like a lot of what I was writing was I suppose quite negative, or it wasn't as upbeat and optimistic, and I wanted, you know, a very obvious love song on the record, lyrically at least. Musically, because the structure is quite straightforward and predictable, I wanted to do things underneath with the music that were more adventurous, and so there's obviously lots of organ, lots of guitar work, and there's an extended outro, which is something I always really like as well, with lots of, well, they're not real strings, but we couldn't afford real strings, but there's lots of nice synthy strings in there, which kind of remind me of the Verve, and I really wanted to keep it in. I remember Steve cutting it out and replacing it with some riffy kind of guitars, and I totally flipped out when I heard it, and so he put the strings back in. I think there was a consideration of, you know, real guitars versus fake strings, but I just loved what I heard. I didn't care if it was real or fake, and I needed it to be there. So even though I suppose when I listen to this track today, I'm not crazy about the vocal, my vocal has changed quite a bit over time, I still love the instrumentation, and I actually really enjoy listening to the instrumental. Track 10 is the final track on the Distance album, and it's 10 Years Time, which was the very first track that I ever professionally recorded. I had recorded a demo of this song on my first demo CD, much like with Killing Kind, the only other cover on this album. But this song has quite a different backstory. It's originally written and recorded by Gabrielle, the pop singer from the UK, and I had heard Billy Farrell's production on the chorus in Blue Record and felt that it was perfect for what I wanted with my own music. But at that point I hadn't written much at all. I don't think I'd even written a full song at that point, and this felt like the right way to start out. And so I approached Billy, and we started work on our version of this song, which it was really important to both of us that it would stand on its own and it wouldn't sound like a karaoke carbon copy. And I think we definitely even exceeded our own expectations of that. I think bringing in the likes of the cello just kind of elevated it emotionally, and it just brought an element, I think, of sophistication to the track. So this took a few takes to get off the ground, this song, in terms of release, because I actually released it first in 2005 during my Irish record deal, which didn't work out, and then in 2006 in the spring I released it independently to radio as just a radio only single, and it ended up doing quite well, got a lot of good reviews. And then finally, when I signed my first UK deal in autumn of that same year, we released it as a double A side with Spend the Night in November that year. And I think it's definitely aged well. As much as it's of its time, it's also a classic, and I think even though it's not one of the songs that I wrote, it's one that I'm happy is part of my story and it's part of my journey, and it's one that I'm really proud of. So I hope you still enjoy it today.